Hey everyone, welcome. Let's start with a little thought experiment, shall we? Imagine the engine that powers our entire modern world, that constant nonstop cycle of buying and selling. What if it just suddenly sputtered and died?
No, I'm serious. Really think about it. What if for a week, or a month, or maybe forever, we all decided to stop buying anything that wasn't an absolute bare-bones necessity? It sounds kind of simple, right? But the ripple effects would be absolutely massive. They'd change pretty much everything about the world we know. So before we dive into that crazy scenario, let's get on the same page about what we're talking about. The word is consumerism. And look, this isn't just about you buying groceries or paying your rent. It's this much bigger, powerful idea in our culture that we should always be getting more stuff, not just to survive, but to show who we are, to feel good, to build our identity.
So how did this whole idea get to be such a huge deal? Well, in most of our modern economies, especially the capitalist ones, it's not just a small part of the system, it is the system. It's the engine that keeps the whole thing humming along. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Capitalism is this giant, complex engine, and our spending, that's the fuel. When we buy things, companies make money. They use that money to invent new things, hire more people, and then make even more things for us to buy. See? It's a cycle, and we, the consumers, are the ones who keep it spinning.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. This isn't just some abstract theory. We've got the data from really credible academic sources like the OECD and the World Bank, and what they show is pretty wild. In a lot of developed countries, household spending, that's just you and me buying stuff, is the single biggest piece of the entire economy, of what we call GDP. Our shopping habits aren't a side story, they're the main event.
But why? Why do we buy so much stuff? Is it really just our own free choice? Well, not quite. According to top-notch academic researchers like Juliet Schor, her book The Overspent American is a classic in this field, we're constantly being pushed and pulled by these really powerful forces. Advertising, what our friends are buying, social pressure. It all creates this culture where what we own gets tangled up with who we are.
Okay, so if our spending is the fuel, what happens when we turn off the gas? Let's follow the chain reaction in a capitalist system. It gets pretty intense.
Right, so this wouldn't just be one big explosion. It would happen in waves. The short term, honestly, it would be catastrophic. And we know this from analysis by groups like the IMF. A sudden stop in spending would cause what they call a demand shock. That means a massive recession, businesses shutting down, and millions of jobs lost. But given enough time, the system would have to adapt. Maybe we'd see a shift toward things that last longer, or services instead of stuff. And in the very long run, maybe the whole point of the economy would shift away from just growth, towards things like our well-being and a healthier planet.
But that's just capitalism, right? What about the alternative? How would a socialist or communist system, which, at least in theory, isn't all about consumer demand, how would it handle a world where nobody's shopping?
And this is where you see this huge gap between the idea and how it actually played out. On paper, the theory of communism sounds great. You meet everyone's basic needs, you get rid of all that wasteful shopping. But when you look at the historical research on places like the Soviet Union, you see a totally different picture. Without the engine of consumer choice and competition, their systems really struggled. They had constant shortages and were super inefficient. The desire for goods didn't just vanish, it just moved underground into black markets.
And that brings us to a really, really important point that goes way beyond economics. Shopping isn't just about getting things. It's about who we are.
Just think about it for a second. The clothes you choose to wear, the music you listen to, the brands you decide to follow, we use all of that stuff to signal who we are and to find our people, our tribe. So if you just suddenly took all of that away, you'd be left with this huge cultural void. What would we use to define ourselves? That is a massive question that any society trying to move past consumerism would have to answer.
Okay, so we've looked at both sides of the coin. In our wild thought experiment where consumerism just disappears overnight, which system actually survives? Capitalism or socialism? So, who's the winner? As you can see here, the answer is, well, it's complicated. Capitalism would be incredibly vulnerable to that initial shock. It would be brutal, but its greatest strength, its secret weapon, is its ability to adapt and innovate its way out of trouble. Socialism, on the other hand, is actually less vulnerable to a change in our shopping habits because it's already trying to control them. Its weakness is more fundamental, a long history of just not being very good at meeting people's needs, which leads to its own kind of collapse.
Which leaves us with this one last giant question. Getting rid of that relentless pressure to always buy more, it sounds pretty good, right? It could mean less waste, more focus on things that actually matter. But it would also mean facing down huge economic chaos and finding brand new ways to build our identities. So what do you think? Is that trade-off worth it?